Hey, fantasy football fanatics! It's Matthew Barry here, your trusted guide through the exhilarating and sometimes frustrating world of fantasy football. We're knee-deep in the action. The smell of the gridiron is in the air, and every decision we make can make or break our fantasy season. Let's be honest, we've all experienced those late-night waiver wire scrambles, the agonizing trade proposals, and the nail-biting Sundays spent glued to the Red Zone channel. It's a grind, no doubt, but that's what makes it so exhilarating. The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, and the camaraderie, or trash talking, among friends, family, and coworkers. It's all part of the fantasy football experience. But let's face it, we're not just here to participate. We're here to win. We're here to hoist that championship trophy at the end of the season and earn those bragging rights that come with it. And that's what I'm here to help you with. We're now entering Week 5, a crucial juncture in the fantasy football season. The standings are starting to take shape, early season trends are emerging, and those who started slow are feeling the pressure to turn things around. This is it, folks, the make or break point where you separate the contenders from the pretenders. This is where you dig deep, analyze those matchups, and make those bold moves that will define your season. Don't let this opportunity slip away. It's time to buckle down, strategize, and dominate your league. Imagine this. You're sitting at 2-2, staring at your roster, wondering how you got here. You drafted well, you thought you had a solid team, but a few unfortunate injuries or unexpected duds have left you scrambling. Don't panic. It's not too late to salvage your season and make a run for the playoffs. The key is to stay proactive, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. Don't be afraid to shake things up, make those tough decisions, and trust your instincts. Remember, this is fantasy football. Anything can happen. One of the biggest mistakes fantasy managers make is overlooking the importance of matchups. You can't just plug in your studs every week and expect them to produce. You need to analyze the opposing defenses, identify favorable matchups, and even consider those under-the-radar players who could explode for a big week. That's where in-depth statistical analysis comes in. Don't worry, you don't need to be a math whiz to understand this stuff. There are tons of great resources and tools available, and we'll dive into some of my favorites later on. Section 5. Unleashing the power of trades. Trades are the lifeblood of fantasy football. They can make or break your season, inject your team with much-needed talent, and create those unforgettable moments of triumph or despair among your league mates. But here's the thing. A good trade is a two-way street. It's not about ripping off your opponent. It's about finding mutually beneficial deals that improve both teams. We'll discuss some key strategies for identifying those win-win trades that can give you an edge. Section 6. The Week 5 Blueprint. So, are you ready to take your fantasy game to the next level? In this video, I'm going to give you the blueprint for Week 5 domination. We'll dive into specific matchups, analyze player trends, uncover hidden gems on the waiver wire, and craft those game-changing trades that will leave your opponents in awe. Get ready to transform your roster and unleash your inner fantasy football guru. Let's do this. Section 1. The Numbers Game. Why matchups matter. Alright, fantasy footballers, let's talk matchups. You might have the best running back on paper, a true stud, but what happens when he faces a brick wall of a defense? Those yards per carry plummet, those touchdowns disappear, and suddenly, your fantasy stud is laying an egg. That's why understanding matchups is crucial. We need to know which defenses are giving up points like it's their job, and which ones are stingier than a fantasy owner during trade negotiations. It's not just about avoiding the obvious powerhouses either. Sometimes, a team might excel at shutting down the run, but struggle against the pass, or vice versa. Knowing these tendencies can give you a huge advantage when setting your lineups. Section 2. Unveiling the defensive juggernauts. Every year, we see dominant defenses emerge, those units that strike fear into the hearts of opposing quarterbacks and fantasy managers alike. These are the teams you want to avoid at all costs, the ones that can single-handedly derail your fantasy week. Think about teams like the San Francisco 49ers, known for their ferocious pass rush and lockdown secondary. Or the Pittsburgh Steelers, with their history of hard-hitting defense and knack for creating turnovers. These are the kinds of defenses you want to steer clear of, especially when it comes to your star players. Of course, these defensive juggernauts can change from year to year, which is why staying up to date on defensive rankings and performance is essential. Section 3. Exploiting favorable matchups, finding the weak links. Now for the fun part. Identifying those defenses that are ripe for the picking. These are the teams that are giving up points left and right, the ones that make even average players look like fantasy superstars. Look for teams with porous secondaries, those that struggle to cover receivers and give up big plays through the air. Target teams with weak run defenses, those that get gashed on the ground and allow running backs to run wild. Finding these favorable matchups is like discovering hidden treasure in the fantasy football world. It's about identifying those under-the-radar players who have the potential to explode for big weeks against the right opponents. Section 4. Beyond the box score. Delving deeper into player stats. All right, fantasy gurus, it's time to go beyond the basic stats and dig a little deeper. Sure, yards and touchdowns are important, but they don't tell the whole story. We need to look at the underlying metrics, the advanced stats that reveal a player's true value. For example, let's talk about target share. This metric tells us what percentage of a team's passes are going to a particular receiver. A high target share indicates a quarterback's trust in a receiver and suggests consistent opportunities for fantasy production. Another crucial stat is red zone touches. These are the touches a player gets inside the opponent's 20-yard line, where scoring opportunities are highest. A player who sees a high volume of red zone touches is more likely to find the end zone, which translates to fantasy gold. Section 5. Red zone efficiency. Touchdowns. Win championships. Speaking of touchdowns, let's talk about red zone efficiency. It's one thing to get those valuable touches inside the 20-yard line. It's another thing entirely to convert those opportunities into 6 points. Some players are simply touchdown machines, those who seem to find the end zone with ease. Others, not so much. They might rack up yards between the 20s, but struggle to punch it in when it matters most. When analyzing players, pay close attention to their red zone efficiency. Look for players who consistently convert their opportunities into touchdowns, as they will be invaluable assets to your fantasy team. Section 6. Target monsters. Identifying high-volume receivers. In today's pass-happy NFL, wide receivers are more important than ever in fantasy football. And when it comes to wide receivers, one stat reigns supreme: targets. Targets represent opportunities, and in fantasy football, opportunities equal points. A receiver who sees a high volume of targets, even if he doesn't catch every pass, has a much higher floor than a receiver who is rarely targeted. Look for receivers who are heavily involved in their team's passing game, those who are consistently targeted by their quarterbacks. These target monsters are the lifeblood of fantasy offenses and can provide a steady stream of points week after week. Section 7. The power of advanced metrics. Now, I know what you're thinking. This all sounds great, but how do I access these advanced stats? Don't worry, you don't need to be a data scientist to unlock the power of advanced metrics. There are tons of fantastic resources available to fantasy managers of all levels. Websites like Fantasy Pros, RotoWorld, and Pro Football Focus offer a wealth of statistical data, including advanced metrics, player rankings, and expert analysis. Many fantasy football apps, such as ESPN Fantasy, Yahoo Fantasy, and Sleeper, also provide in-depth stats and tools to help you make informed decisions. Anywhere else. Section 9. Putting it all together. Building a winning game plan. Now that we've covered the importance of matchups, delved into advanced stats, and explored some valuable resources, it's time to put it all together. Building a winning game plan for Week 5, or any week, requires a combination of research, analysis, and a little bit of gut instinct. Start by analyzing the matchups, identifying favorable and unfavorable situations for your players. Then, delve into the advanced stats, looking for players who are poised for big weeks based on their recent performance and underlying metrics. Don't be afraid to make bold moves, whether it's swinging a trade for a difference maker or picking up a high upside player off the waiver wire. Remember, fortune favors the bold in the world of fantasy football. Section 10. Stay ahead of the curve. Adapting to the unexpected. Finally, remember that fantasy football is a fluid and unpredictable game. Injuries happen, players break out unexpectedly, and even the best laid plans can go awry. That's why it's essential to stay ahead of the curve, to be adaptable, and adjust your strategy as needed. Monitor player news and injury reports closely, and don't be afraid to make roster moves throughout the week, even if it means dropping a player you drafted in the early rounds. Remember, the key to fantasy football success is not just about building a great team on draft day. It's about actively managing your roster, making smart decisions, and adapting to the ever-changing landscape of the NFL season. All right, fantasy football fanatics, let's talk trades. In the cutthroat world of fantasy football, trades are the ultimate power move, the chess match within the game, the opportunity to reshape your roster and outmaneuver your opponents. But remember, a good trade is a two-way street. It's not about fleecing your league mate. It's about finding those mutually beneficial deals that elevate both teams. Think of it like this. You're a general manager, and your fantasy team is your army. Just like a shrewd general assesses his troops and identifies areas for improvement, you need to analyze your roster and pinpoint those positions where a strategic acquisition could make all the difference. But before you hit that trade button, let's explore some key strategies for navigating the treacherous waters of the fantasy football trade market. One of the fundamental principles of successful trading, in both fantasy and reality, is the art of buying low and selling high. In fantasy football, this means identifying players whose perceived value is lower than their actual potential and acquiring them before their stock skyrockets. Think of it like scouting for hidden gems in the rough. For example, imagine a talented wide receiver who had a slow start to the season due to a tough early schedule or limited targets. His fantasy value might be depressed, but if you believe in his talent and see a favorable upcoming schedule, he could be a prime buy low candidate. Conversely, if a player on your roster is exceeding expectations and their value is inflated, it might be time to consider selling high and cashing in on their hot start. Yes. Duh. Fantasy football is a game of momentum. Just like a team on a winning streak can seem unstoppable, players who are performing well tend to continue their upward trajectory. As fantasy managers, it's our job to identify these players who are heating up and ride their hot hand to fantasy glory. Look for players who are seeing increased playing time, targets, or touches. Pay attention to changes in offensive schemes or coaching philosophies that might benefit certain players. For example, if a team transitions to a more pass-heavy offense, their wide receiver's fantasy value could skyrocket. Don't be afraid to make a move for a player who is on a roll, even if their name recognition isn't quite there yet. Sometimes, the best trades involve acquiring players before they become household names and their value becomes prohibitive. In the moment. Section 5. Trading for need-filling roster holes strategically. One of the most common mistakes fantasy managers make is holding on to players out of loyalty or sentimentality, even when it's detrimental to their team's overall success. Remember, this is a business, and sometimes you have to make cold, calculated decisions to improve your roster. If you have a glaring weakness at a particular position, don't be afraid to explore trade options to address that need. For example, if your running back core is decimated by injuries, it might be time to package a few assets from a position of strength to acquire a stud running back who can carry your team. The key is to be strategic and prioritize your needs. Don't overpay for a marginal upgrade, but also don't be afraid to make a bold move if it addresses a critical weakness and puts your team in a better position to compete. A winning lineup. The quarterback position is often the cornerstone of a fantasy football team, the field general who can rack up points with their arm and their legs. But finding the right quarterback for your Week 5 lineup can be a delicate balancing act, as you weigh the merits of consistency versus upside. On one hand, you have the reliable veterans, those seasoned signal callers who might not win you weeks single-handedly but are unlikely to completely tank your lineup either. They offer a steady floor of points, a reassuring presence in your lineup week after week. On the other hand, you have the young gunslingers, those high-ceiling quarterbacks who can erupt for monster performances but also come with a higher degree of volatility. They might throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns one week, only to follow it up with a 3-interception dud the next. The running back position. the source of both endless joy and agonizing frustration for fantasy managers. In today's NFL, with its emphasis on pass-heavy offenses and committee approaches, finding reliable running backs is like searching for a needle in a haystack. Gone are the days of workhorse backs who dominated touches and carried fantasy teams on their backs. Now, we have a dizzying array of backfield committees with 2 or even 3 running backs vying for touches. It's enough to make your head spin. The key to navigating this running back roulette is to stay informed, to monitor playing time and usage patterns closely, and to be willing to adapt your strategy as needed. Sometimes it's better to start a running back on a hot streak, even if he's part of a committee, than to stick with a struggling stud who's not getting the touches. Wide receivers are the lifeblood of today's pass-happy NFL, and in fantasy football, they're often the key to racking up those big scores. With so many talented wideouts in the league, finding starters for your Week 5 lineup is rarely a problem. The challenge lies in optimizing those starting spots by exploiting favorable matchups. As we discussed earlier, analyzing matchups is crucial in fantasy football, and this is especially true at the wide receiver position. You want to target receivers who are facing defenses that struggle to cover the pass, those that give up big plays and allow opposing quarterbacks to rack up yards through the air. Look for receivers who are facing off against inexperienced cornerbacks, those who are known for their coverage liabilities or who might be hampered by injuries. These are the matchups where your wide receivers can feast, putting up monster numbers and carrying your fantasy team to victory. Section 5. The tight end tussle. Finding value in a shallow pool. The tight end position in fantasy football is often a tale of 2 tiers. On one hand, you have the elite tight ends, the ones who are almost guaranteed to deliver week in and week out. These players are the cornerstone of many fantasy teams, providing consistent points and often being the difference between a win and a loss. At the very top, you have a handful of elite tight ends, those game-changing players who can single-handedly win you weeks with their ability to catch touchdowns and rack up yards after the catch. These are the players who are often drafted in the early rounds, and for good reason. Their ability to dominate on the field translates directly to fantasy points, making them invaluable assets. But after those elite few, the talent pool drops off significantly, leaving fantasy managers scrambling for scraps. The middle and lower tiers of tight ends are often filled with players who are inconsistent, injury-prone, or simply not utilized enough in their team's offensive schemes. This can lead to a lot of frustration and second-guessing for fantasy managers who didn't secure one of the top-tier options. If you weren't fortunate enough to draft one of those top-tier tight ends, finding a reliable starter for your Week 5 lineup can feel like an exercise in futility. You might find yourself constantly checking the waiver wire, looking for any glimmer of hope, any player who might have a favorable matchup or who has shown some recent signs of life. But fear not, my fellow fantasy managers, there is hope yet. The key to navigating the shallow pool of tight ends is to be proactive and strategic. It's about more than just picking a name and hoping for the best. It's about doing your homework, understanding the matchups, and being willing to take calculated risks. The key to finding value at the tight end position is to be proactive, to explore all your options, and to be willing to take some risks. This means keeping an eye on the waiver wire, looking for emerging talents, and not being afraid to make bold moves. Sometimes, the best tight end for your team might not be the most obvious choice. Don't be afraid to stream tight ends based on matchups. Streaming is a strategy where you pick up and start a different tight end each week based on their matchup. This can be particularly effective if you can identify defenses that are weak against tight ends. By targeting these matchups, you can maximize your points and find value where others might not see it. To target players who are facing defenses that struggle to cover the position. Some defenses are notoriously bad at covering tight ends, and this is where you can find hidden gems. Look for players who are going up against these defenses and who have the potential to exploit these weaknesses, or who have a history of giving up big plays to tight ends. Historical data can be a valuable tool in your arsenal. By looking at past performances, you can identify trends and make more informed decisions. If a defense has a track record of giving up big plays to tight ends, that's a matchup you want to target. Another strategy is to look for tight ends who are becoming more involved in their team's offense. This could be due to an injury to another player, a change in the team's offensive scheme, or simply a player who is starting to come into their own. These are the players who might not be on everyone's radar yet, but who have the potential to make a big impact. Pay attention to target share and snap counts. A tight end who is on the field for a high percentage of snaps and who is getting a significant number of targets is more likely to produce fantasy points. These metrics can give you a better idea of a player's role in the offense and their potential for future production. It's also important to stay up to date with the latest news and reports. Injuries, coaching changes, and other factors can all impact a player's value. By staying informed, you can make more timely and effective decisions. And don't forget about the importance of gut feeling. Sometimes, you just have a hunch about a player. Maybe you've seen something in their play that others haven't noticed, or maybe you just have a good feeling about their potential. Trusting your instincts can sometimes lead to great rewards. In conclusion, while the tight end position in fantasy football can be challenging, it's not impossible to find value. By being proactive, doing your research, and being willing to take some risks, you can navigate the shallow pool and find the players who can help you succeed. So keep your head up, stay focused, and remember that every week is a new opportunity to find that hidden gem. Good luck, and may your tight end picks bring you many victories this season. Section 6. Flexing your muscles. Maximizing the flex position. The flex position in fantasy football is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gives you the flexibility to start an extra running back, wide receiver, or tight end, adding another potential weapon to your offensive arsenal. On the other hand, it can also be a source of agonizing indecision as you try to choose the best option from a pool of seemingly equal players. The key to maximizing the flex position is to approach it strategically, to consider all your options carefully, and to make the decision that best balances your team's needs with the potential upside of each player. If your running back situation is shaky, you might opt for a high upside running back who has a chance to break a big play or find the end zone. If you're loaded at running back but need a spark in the passing game, you might go with a wide receiver who has a favorable matchup or is coming off a strong performance. Section 7. Don't forget the DST streaming for success. In the world of fantasy football, defenses and special teams, DST, are often treated like afterthoughts, the last pieces of the puzzle that managers slot into their lineups without much thought. But don't be fooled by their seemingly secondary status. A strong DST performance can swing a week in your favor, just as easily as a star quarterback or running back. The key to finding success with your DST is to embrace the concept of streaming, which means picking up and dropping defenses based on their weekly matchups. Instead of drafting and holding onto a single defense all season, you're constantly looking for the best matchups, targeting defenses that are facing struggling offenses or who have a knack for creating turnovers. Don't be afraid to make multiple DST moves throughout the season, even if it means dropping a defense that you drafted relatively high. Remember, it's all about maximizing your weekly scoring potential, and sometimes that means making tough decisions and embracing the volatility of the DST landscape. Section 8. Kicker Carousel, riding the hot foot. The kicker position, the bane of fantasy football managers everywhere. Trying to predict which kicker will have a good week is often an exercise in futility, as even the most accurate kickers can fall victim to missed extra points, blocked field goals, and the whims of their team's offensive coordinator. But fear not, my fellow fantasy managers, for even in the chaotic world of kicker scoring, there are strategies you can employ to gain an edge. One such strategy is known as riding the hot foot, which involves picking up and dropping kickers based on their recent performance and upcoming matchups. The logic behind this approach is that kickers, like any other player, can go on hot streaks or cold streaks. A kicker who's been nailing everything in recent weeks is more likely to continue that trend, while a kicker who's struggling might be best left on the waiver wire. Section 9. Trust your gut. The importance of intuition. In the world of fantasy football, where data analysis and statistical projections reign supreme, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers and forget that this is, at its core, a game of intuition and gut feeling. While research and analysis are essential for making informed decisions, there's no substitute for that inner voice that tells you to start a certain player or make a bold trade. Sometimes you just have a feeling about a player or a matchup, a hunch that defies logic and statistical analysis but feels undeniably right. Don't be afraid to trust those instincts, even if they go against the grain of conventional wisdom. Remember, fantasy football is a game of imperfect information. Injuries happen, players break out unexpectedly, and even the most sophisticated algorithms can't predict the future with 100% accuracy. So trust your gut, embrace the unknown, and don't be afraid to make those bold moves that could be the difference between a forgettable season and a championship run. Section 10. The thrill of the unknown. Embracing the fantasy roller coaster. As we finalize our Week 5 lineups and hit that submit button, a sense of anticipation and excitement washes over us. We've pored over stats, analyzed matchups, and made those tough decisions, but now the outcome is out of our hands. All we can do is sit back, watch the games unfold, and hope for the best. That's the beauty of fantasy football, the thrill of the unknown, the way it keeps us on the edge of our seats week after week. It's a roller coaster ride full of highs and lows, moments of euphoria and crushing disappointment. But we wouldn't have it any other way. So buckle up, fantasy footballers, and enjoy the ride. Embrace the chaos, savor the victories, and learn from the defeats. And remember, no matter what happens on the virtual gridiron, we'll be back here next week, ready to do it all again. All right, fantasy footballers, let's talk about one of the most dreaded aspects of our beloved game, bye weeks. These are the weeks that can make or break your season, the ones that test your mettle as a manager. It's not just about having a strong starting lineup, it's about depth, strategy, and foresight. Those dreaded weeks when our star players are sidelined, leaving gaping holes in our lineups and sending us scrambling for replacement options. It's a scenario that every fantasy football manager dreads. You look at your roster and see those empty slots, and a sense of panic starts to set in. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's enough to make even the most seasoned fantasy manager curse the football gods. The frustration is real, and it's palpable. You might find yourself questioning your draft choices, your trades, and even your entire strategy. But here's the thing, adversity is a part of the game. It's how you respond to it that defines your success. But fear not, my fellow fantasy fanatics, for even in the face of bye-week adversity, there are strategies we can employ to mitigate the damage and even turn these seemingly negative situations into opportunities for gain. It's all about perspective and preparation. Instead of seeing bye weeks as a hindrance, view them as a challenge to overcome, a puzzle to solve. Remember, every cloud has a silver lining, and those blank spaces on your roster represent a chance to get creative, to explore new options, and to potentially unearth hidden gems who can contribute to your fantasy success. Think of it as an opportunity to showcase your managerial skills, to prove that you can adapt and thrive under pressure. The key is to be proactive, to anticipate these bye weeks well in advance, and to have a plan in place for how you'll address them. This means keeping an eye on the schedule from the very beginning, knowing when your key players will be out, and having a list of potential replacements ready to go. Don't wait until the last minute to scramble for replacements. By then, the best options will be long gone, and you'll be left with the dregs of the waiver wire. Instead, be vigilant. Monitor player performances, keep track of injuries, and always be on the lookout for emerging talent. The waiver wire can be your best friend if you use it wisely. Another crucial aspect is understanding the matchups. Not all bye weeks are created equal. Some weeks, you might be up against a weaker opponent, giving you a bit more leeway in your lineup decisions. Other weeks, you might be facing a powerhouse, requiring you to pull out all the stops. Tailor your strategy to the specific circumstances of each week. Additionally, consider the long-term implications of your decisions. Sometimes, it might be worth sacrificing a bit in the short term to set yourself up for future success. For example, picking up a player who has a favorable schedule in the coming weeks, even if they might not be the best option for the current week, can pay dividends down the line. Trades can also be a valuable tool during bye weeks. If you find yourself with an abundance of players at one position and a shortage at another, don't hesitate to make a move. Look for trade partners who have complementary needs and see if you can strike a deal that benefits both sides. Remember, fantasy football is a dynamic game, and flexibility is key. Communication is another vital component. Stay in touch with your league mates. Keep an ear to the ground for any potential trade opportunities, and don't be afraid to reach out and initiate discussions. Building good relationships within your league can open doors to mutually beneficial deals and give you an edge when it comes to navigating bye weeks. Lastly, trust your instincts. Fantasy football is as much about gut feeling as it is about statistics and analysis. If you have a hunch about a player, don't be afraid to take a chance. Sometimes those gut decisions can be the difference between a win and a loss. Believe in your ability to make the right calls, and don't second-guess yourself too much. In conclusion, bye weeks are an inevitable part of fantasy football, but they don't have to be a source of stress and frustration. With the right mindset, preparation, and strategy, you can turn these challenging weeks into opportunities for growth and success. Embrace the challenge, stay proactive, and remember that every setback is just a setup for a comeback. Happy managing, and may your fantasy season be filled with victories. In the high-stakes world of fantasy football, where every point can mean the difference between victory and defeat, staying informed about player injuries is paramount. But navigating the often murky waters of injury reports can be a treacherous task, as teams and coaches often play their cards close to the vest, leaving fantasy managers scrambling to decipher cryptic updates and separate fact from fiction. 1 minute, a player is listed as questionable with a hamstring strain. The next, they're ruled out for the season with a torn ACL. It's enough to make your head spin, especially when you're trying to make those crucial lineup decisions. The key is to be vigilant, to consult multiple sources, and to develop a healthy dose of skepticism when it comes to injury reports. Don't rely solely on a player's team website or a single beat writer's Twitter feed. Instead, cast a wider net, consulting reputable fantasy football websites, injury aggregators, and even the social media accounts of players themselves. In the unpredictable world of fantasy football, where injuries can strike at any moment, it's always wise to have a backup plan, a contingency strategy to protect your most valuable assets. That's where the concept of handcuffing comes in, a strategy that involves drafting or acquiring the backups to your star players, providing insurance in case of injury or unexpected decline. Think of it like this: you wouldn't drive your car without a spare tire, would you? Of course not. So why would you leave your fantasy roster exposed to the potential devastation of a season-ending injury to your stud running back or wide receiver? Handcuffing is particularly important at the running back position, where injuries are more common and the drop-off in talent from starter to backup can be significant. If you invest a high draft pick in a top-tier running back, it's only logical to spend a later round pick on his handcuff, ensuring that you have a capable replacement ready to step in if disaster strikes. In the data-driven world of fantasy football, where every snap, every touch, and every target is meticulously tracked and analyzed, it's essential to go beyond the basic statistics and delve into the nuances of player workloads. By monitoring how often and how effectively players are being used, we can identify emerging trends, spot potential red flags, and make more informed decisions about our fantasy rosters. For example, if a running back who's accustomed to handling 20 touches per game suddenly sees his workload reduced to 10 or 12 touches, it could be a sign of fatigue, injury, or a change in the team's offensive philosophy. Similarly, if a wide receiver who's been a target hog early in the season suddenly sees his targets dwindle, it could indicate a loss of confidence from his quarterback or the emergence of another receiver on the depth chart. By paying close attention to these subtle shifts in player workloads, we can anticipate potential problems before they arise and make proactive moves to protect our fantasy interests. In the ever-evolving world of fantasy football, where every decision can make or break your season, it's crucial to stay ahead of the curve. The landscape of the league can change dramatically from week to week, with injuries, trades, and breakout performances constantly reshaping the playing field. This dynamic nature of the game means that managers must be vigilant and proactive, always looking for ways to gain an edge over their competition. One of the most effective strategies for doing so is to think long-term, to anticipate future needs, and to be willing to make moves that might not pay immediate dividends but could position your team for success down the road. It's not just about winning the next game, it's about building a team that can sustain success throughout the entire season. This requires a deep understanding of player potential, team dynamics, and the ever-changing landscape of the NFL. One of the key components of this long-term strategy is the art of stashing. Stashing involves using your bench spots to hold on to players who might not be fantasy relevant at the moment, but have the potential to break out in the future. This can be a game changer, especially in the later stages of the season, when injuries and bye weeks can wreak havoc on your lineup. The concept of stashing is all about foresight and patience. It's about identifying those hidden gems who, given the right circumstances, could become valuable assets to your team. These players might be rookies with high upside who are currently buried on the depth chart, waiting for their opportunity to shine. Or they could be players returning from injury, who, once fully healthy, could see an expanded role later in the season. Injuries are a part of the game, and having a player stashed on your bench who is on the verge of returning can provide a significant boost to your team when you need it most. Another category of stash-worthy players includes those who are in a timeshare situation. These players might be sharing playing time with another player, but have the talent and potential to take over the starting job if given the chance. It's all about recognizing the potential for change and being ready to capitalize on it. The key to successful stashing is to identify players with high ceilings but low floors. These are players who might not be consistent fantasy producers week in and week out, but have the potential to win you a week or two single-handedly if they get hot or their situation improves. It's a high-risk, high-reward strategy that requires a keen eye for talent and a willingness to take chances. But when it pays off, it can be the difference between a good season and a championship season. To master the art of stashing, you need to stay informed and be proactive. Keep an eye on injury reports, depth charts, and player performances. Look for trends and patterns that might indicate a player is on the verge of a breakout. And most importantly, be patient. Stashing is a long-term play, and it might take weeks or even months for your investment to pay off. But when it does, the rewards can be immense. Imagine having a player on your bench who suddenly becomes a top fantasy performer, just as your team is making a playoff push. That kind of foresight and preparation can give you a significant edge over your competition. In addition to stashing, it's also important to be flexible and adaptable. The fantasy football landscape is constantly changing, and what worked last week might not work this week. Be willing to adjust your strategy as needed, and don't be afraid to make bold moves if the situation calls for it. Consistency is important, but so is the ability to recognize and seize opportunities when they arise. Sometimes, the best move is the one that goes against conventional wisdom. Trust your instincts, do your research, and be prepared to take calculated risks. Ultimately, the goal of planning for the future in fantasy football is to build a team that can weather the ups and downs of the season and come out on top. It's about making smart, strategic decisions that position your team for long-term success. So, as you navigate the twists and turns of the fantasy football season, remember to think ahead, stay informed, and be willing to take chances. With the right approach, you can turn potential into performance and lead your team to victory. As the fantasy football season progresses and the trade deadline approaches, a sense of urgency permeates the air. Teams are jockeying for playoff position. Managers are assessing their rosters with a critical eye, and the rumor mill is churning with trade speculation. It's a time for bold moves, strategic maneuvering, and perhaps a touch of desperation. The trade deadline represents a crucial opportunity to reshape your roster, to address weaknesses, and to make a final push for the playoffs. It's a time to cash in on overachieving players, to buy low on undervalued assets, and to explore every possible avenue to improve your team. But be warned, the trade deadline can also be a dangerous time, as managers can get caught up in the hype, make rash decisions, or overpay for players who don't live up to their inflated value. In the world of fantasy football, where every point matters and the margin for error is slim, it's not enough to simply analyze a player's past performance or current matchup. To gain a true edge, we need to look ahead, to project future performance, and to identify players who are poised for success based on their upcoming schedule. That's where the concept of strength of schedule comes in, a metric that measures the relative difficulty of a player's remaining opponents. For example, a running back facing a string of defenses that rank among the league's worst in rushing yards allowed would have a favorable strength of schedule, suggesting that he's likely to put up big numbers in the coming weeks. Conversely, a wide receiver facing a gauntlet of shutdown cornerbacks and elite secondaries would have an unfavorable strength of schedule, indicating that his production might be limited. By taking strength of schedule into account, we can make more informed decisions about which players to start, which players to trade for, and which players to target on the waiver wire. In the fast-paced, ever-evolving world of fantasy football, where news breaks at lightning speed and the landscape of the league can change in an instant, staying informed is paramount. To gain an edge over your competition, you need to be plugged in, to be in the know, to have your finger on the pulse of the fantasy football universe. This means checking for injury updates, monitoring player news, and staying abreast of any developments that could impact your fantasy team. Don't be the manager who shows up to the game day with an outdated lineup, oblivious to the fact that their star running back is inactive or their starting quarterback has been benched. Make it a habit to check for updates throughout the week, not just on game day. Set up alerts on your phone, follow reliable fantasy football analysts on social media, and make time to read articles and listen to podcasts. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to make those crucial roster decisions. As the fantasy football playoffs approach and the stakes reach their peak, it's not enough to simply want to win. You have to believe that you will win. You have to cultivate a championship mindset, to visualize yourself hoisting that trophy, to embrace the pressure and thrive in the spotlight. This means believing in your abilities, trusting your instincts, and never doubting your capacity to succeed. It means blocking out the noise, ignoring the doubters, and focusing on the task at hand. It means approaching every game with confidence, determination, and an unwavering belief in your team. Remember, fantasy football is as much a mental game as it is a statistical one. If you believe you can win, you're already halfway there. So there you have it, fantasy football fanatics. We've covered a ton of ground today, from analyzing matchups and navigating bye weeks to mastering the art of trades and embracing the unpredictable nature of this game we love. But the most important takeaway, the one message I want you to remember long after this video is over, is this: the power is in your hands. You are the architect of your fantasy destiny. Every decision you make, from draft day to the championship game, shapes the course of your season. Don't be afraid to take control, to be aggressive, to make those bold moves that others shy away from. Remember, fortune favors the bold in the world of fantasy football. The information is out there. the resources are available, and the strategies are within your grasp. Now it's time to put it all together, to trust your instincts, and to unleash your inner fantasy football guru. Let's take a moment to recap the key takeaways from our Week 5 deep dive. A concise action plan to guide you to fantasy football glory. First and foremost, remember the importance of matchups. Don't just blindly plug in your studs. Analyze those opposing defenses, identify favorable situations, and exploit those mismatches. Next, stay ahead of the game when it comes to injuries and bye weeks. Handcuff your studs, explore streaming options, and don't be afraid to make those tough roster decisions. Remember, a proactive approach can be the difference between a winning week and a disastrous one. And of course, never underestimate the power of trades. Whether you're buying low, selling high, or simply filling a roster need, a well-executed trade can transform your team and send a message to your league mates that you mean business. In the often risk-averse world of fantasy football, where many managers cling to their draft picks like precious jewels, it's the bold, the daring, the unconventional thinkers who often rise to the top. So don't be afraid to zig when everyone else zags. If you have a gut feeling about a player, a hunch that defies logic but just feels right, trust your instincts. If you see a trade opportunity that others might overlook, don't hesitate to pounce. Remember, the greatest risks often yield the greatest rewards. Of course, boldness should always be tempered with strategy and informed decision-making. Don't make reckless moves just for the sake of being different. But when you've done your research, weighed your options, and your gut is telling you to go for it, don't be afraid to make a splash. One of the most captivating aspects of fantasy football, the element that keeps us coming back year after year, is its inherent unpredictability. It's a game where a no-name running back can erupt for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, where a late-round quarterback can outscore a perennial MVP candidate, where a last-second field goal can swing a week in your favor or crush your championship dreams. Embrace the chaos, fantasy footballers. Relish those moments when a player you drafted in the last round wins you a week, or a trade that everyone questioned turns out to be a stroke of genius. Those are the moments that make this game so exhilarating, so addictive, so utterly unforgettable. Remember, if we knew exactly how every game would unfold, if there were no surprises, no upsets, no last-minute heroics, fantasy football would lose its allure. It's the unknown, the possibility of the impossible, that keeps us on the edge of our seats week after week. Beyond the stats, the rankings, the waiver wire claims, and the trash talk, fantasy football is ultimately a game that brings people together. It's a shared passion, a common bond that unites friends, family members, co-workers, and even complete strangers. Whether you're huddled around a television on Sunday afternoon, engaging in a heated debate about a trade proposal, or simply sharing a laugh over a particularly bad beat, fantasy football provides a platform for connection, for camaraderie, for building lasting memories. So embrace the social aspect of this wonderful game. Start a league with your friends, organize a draft party, or join an online community of fellow fantasy enthusiasts. The more you connect with others who share your passion, the more rewarding your fantasy football journey will be. As we wrap up our Week 5 Odyssey, it's important to remember that fantasy football, like life itself, is a journey, not a destination. It's about the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the triumphs and the heartbreaks. It's about the lessons learned, the bonds formed, and the memories created along the way. So savor every moment, fantasy footballers. Embrace the grind, celebrate the victories, and learn from the defeats. And remember, no matter what happens on the virtual gridiron, the true reward lies in the camaraderie, the competition, and the shared passion for this game that brings us together year after year. Now go forth, my fellow fantasy fanatics, armed with the knowledge, the strategies, and the unwavering belief that you have what it takes to conquer your league. May your rosters be stacked, your matchups favorable, and your waiver wire pickups legendary. And remember, above all else, have fun. This is Matthew Berry, signing off. Good luck, and may the fantasy gods be ever in your